To order this commissioner briefing meeting on June 3rd, 2025. Thanks for joining us. Commissioners, are there any questions, comments, changes to this evening's agenda that you would like to discuss at this time?
I would want
Yes.
that we move the presentations ahead of the public comment so that the people can leave. Yeah.
Okay. Any concerns about moving the proclamation to before public comment? All right. Do we need to officially approve that change at the 5 o'clock? Okay. We will. Thank you, Commissioner Whitesides. We'll move that to adjusting that at our 5 o'clock. Anything else? All right. All right, we move on to staff updates, and it has been requested that Section E, Economic Update, be moved to the front of the presentation list. Dan Gerlach is joining us remotely to provide an economic update, and there he is. Good afternoon, Dan. Thanks for joining us.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, how are you?
We are well. It's great to see you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Okay, can everybody see this? If somebody could tell me, because I'm not looking at y'all.
We are all good.
Okay, so, well, obviously it's been a few, over 8 months now since Helene first hit Western North Carolina, including disproportionately Buncombe County. My name is Dan Gerlach. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a Raleigh-based consultant. Formerly served as Governor Mike Easley's Budget, Tax, and Economic Development Advisor. After that, I've served over 10 years as president of the Golden Leaf Foundation, where our only two-time chair of that board, Billy Clark, is a proud Buncombe County resident and did a lot of work in Buncombe County and the environs. I went on for a little bit at East Carolina University to help them with their budget problems and now have an independent consultancy. I appeared before the Buncombe County TDA the other day, and Commissioner Wells was there, and apparently I didn't make her go to sleep, and so she, I think, asked if I might present to y'all. So just from a kind of outside the region looking in, here's kind of the original estimates of when the storm hit a few days after. The Office of State Budget and Management, Governor Stein's, well, then Governor Cooper's, now Governor Stein's Office of Budget Management, noted that there was a lot of damage, especially in the western part of the state, but ascribed a lot of the economic damage to the entire state, or at least to these areas that have some shade in them at all. And I will put it this way. What they measured is, when I was 14 years old, I was an ice cream man, and I rode an ice cream bike. And on a couple of days when it was pouring down rain all day, no out there on the ice cream bike and lost all the sales. And for kind of that is the kind of example that I would give you is how the the measure of the Office of State Budget Management's ideas of economic loss. They estimated that in the shaded area, that kind of hatched area that includes Buncombe County right in the middle of it, that roughly 53% of the damage in North Carolina from the storm, the economic damage, happened within those 15 counties. I'm here to tell you that I believe that estimate is closer to 95% of any kind of economic damage that you could imagine. I'm not saying that an ice cream man in Yadkin County didn't lose a couple days of sale, but I will tell you that the bulk of the damage was, as you can believe, in the counties that which, Buncombe County is right in the heart of it. I was hired by and one of the reasons why I did this and why Vic Isley asked me to present to their board was I was hired by the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina under an authorization by the North Carolina General Assembly to do a business loss assessment. And the statute was that was it, do a business loss assessment. We measured business loss in a forthcoming study in 3 ways. One is, what's the loss to businesses in terms of physical capital? Your building's not there. Your land is no longer there. Your equipment is gone. Your inventory is gone. Maybe you didn't get hit directly. Maybe there's not 4 feet of water in your shop, but if the water was out and the electricity was out, you might have lost your inventory. Then we look at more kind of traditional ways of looking at business loss, which is loss of revenue, right? Where do we expect that the revenue would have been if Helene hadn't dumped 44 trillion gallons of water on the western part of the state? And what is the difference between that and what actually happened? And there are also additional costs imposed by Helene, where a lot of our hotels and so forth had to go and get water shipped in from outside at kind of a temporary water solution until we got the water back up. And congratulations to all the people in your utilities department for getting that done as fast and as well as it could have been done. But there's additional costs there. And finally, it's the human capital. One of the things we worry about is not only the loss of people not being able to work, but also what happens. Are they going to stay around the region, or are they going to go to some other places outside the region? If if their apartment had 4 feet of water, if the business where they worked had uncertain opening, would they just maybe go to Charlotte or to Charleston or wherever? I don't know, some place unlike western part of North Carolina. So we wanted to look at that. And here's the deal on the economic hit. One is on the physical hit. You all have a better sense of this, EB and your staff. You have a great kind of sense of this, that basically, I think between 3 to 4% of your taxable base, the property tax, subject to the property tax is not there. Of course, the inventory is hit as well. We didn't concentrate as much on this for this presentation, but wanted to give you a sense of the economic hit, especially concentrated in the fourth quarter of 2024. By this, I mean the calendar quarter, not your fiscal quarter. So in the fourth quarter, obviously the decline in what we measure in that decline from trend is what we think that the state sales tax collections would have been in Buncombe County, but for Helene, if Helene didn't happen, and what were they actually happened. And then we looked at that kind of state sales tax base, having nothing to do with your local sales tax collections or revenues, but looked at that and said, can we extrapolate from there how much the economic hit was countywide? And so we think that January, February, overall, you still saw a little bit of a rebound in March. It was a bad month in March, flat in the county, but kind of down statewide. So you're not off trend. So we can't ascribe that all to Helene. But what we can say is our estimate is that in that quarter of the total economic loss that North Carolina experienced, over half of it was in Buncombe County alone, which reminds, I think, not only you, but the rest of the residents of the region and the visitors and citizens how important Buncombe County is, and in fact, how hard it was hit. Even if Buncombe County has more resources and more, than the rest of the region and so forth, it didn't really matter because the way the storm hit clearly had a disproportionate effect on your county. Then we go and we kind of look at the labor force, what actually happened here. And the labor force is measured by the Bureau of Labor Statistics doing a survey. So it's not a total population census, but a survey of, calling people and saying, hey, you live in Buncombe County. Are you working? If you're working, you're part of the labor force. And they call up and, are you working? And you say, no. And then they ask you, are you looking for work? Are you available to work? And you say, yes. Well, then you're unemployed, but you're still part of the labor force. But if you're not there to answer the phone because you've moved out of the region, or if you're decided, are you working? No. Are you looking for work? You say no. I mean, because you've kind of given up or other reasons, then you're out of the labor force. Well, look what happened here to the labor force. We see that over time is that it's fairly flat, had a little bit of spike, maybe because some of the people coming into the region said they lived there. Generally, this is based on where you live, not where you work. But generally speaking, is that if I look at this, businesses may have problems finding workers, but it's not because the labor force has fallen off the edge of the earth. It is just a simple fact that it's fairly flat. And frankly, before the storm, we had seen a little bit of weakness in the West, even in Buncombe County. So the good news is that people have said, why would I want to leave this place? I mean, and having some of that kind of the grit and the determination of the West and saying that it will come back. That's how I choose to interpret this chart. Next, please. Oh, wait, I'm driving the show. I'm sorry. So employment is off peak. So this is, remember when I asked, okay, if we call you and you say, this is what a phone used to look like. We call you and we say, are you employed? And you say yes or no. So what happened here is you look what happened is that over time, this is not adjusted for seasonality. So it's a little bit off there. But what you could tell is between September and October, that kind of plummeting down, that kind of sharp decline should never have been there. That we would have expected it to be a little bit higher, probably, fairly flat or even growing compared to where it was. But what we see is that even though in the last couple of months we've seen a little bit of an uptick, the county is still kind of about 4,000, well, about 3,000 jobs, 3,000 less jobs, probably about 2.5% of employment, less than it was even a year ago. Things are not getting worse. Things are maybe getting a little better, but you're not back to where you were. And basically, you're a place where the unemployment rate is generally the lowest in the state, in your area. And generally, people, Buncombe County has not been shrinking over the last few years. So this is a little bit of reminds us that there's a bit of a problem, even though the labor force is not up. So this is the employment damage in the counties that are in the Asheville metropolitan statistical area. This is Buncombe, mainly you, Henderson, and Madison counties. Haywood County used to be part of it, but no more. I don't know what happened. That's just not the way. But if we look at the year-to-year change, this is in payrolls, okay? So this we know is where companies report. This is more reliable. Companies report by sector, like how many people are working on their payrolls. And we saw from September 2023 to September 2024 in the MSA, payrolls were up 2,000. That's the yellow bar pointing upward. But after that, what we find is that from October all the way still, that the employment, this is a little different survey, but these are payrolls. These are people working in Buncombe, Henderson, and Madison counties. So they could live in McDowell or Haywood and be commuting in, or if you live in Buncombe County and you're working in Haywood County, you don't count on this, but somebody from Haywood County who works in Buncombe County does count on this. And just to say that the jobs are still down. And it came back and kind of in the winter looked like we were really on a trend to get rid of this, but no, it's been very stubborn. And frankly, the damage here is if we look year to year from April to April, is in leisure and hospitality. If you look at the third line with numbers down, the third row with numbers down, you see basically leisure and hospitality is down 2,400 year to year. That's about an 8% decline in that sector. And remember, okay, down 2,400. Now let's go back to the last chart. April to April, you're down 1,200 overall. So leisure and hospitality, if it would have held ground, you would be up employment, but it did not. And so where do we see in retail trade, transportation, utilities? I can tell you, I bet this is mainly in retail trade where that decline is of about 1%, a little less than 1%. And then manufacturing has been kind of hard to judge from time to time. It's down a little bit, but it's down a little bit statewide. So that's probably not as much related to the storm because the manufacturers have come back online generally. But you see in your education and health sectors and your professional and business services sectors that those have actually gained, over the past year, that they remain kind of key drivers of your economy. And what's important here? The importance here is that your economic developers, who are some of the best in the state, and I wouldn't say anything bad about them, but I can say something good about them, I think, is that that they're doing their job at helping to diversify your economy. So we know that those sectors that are traded sectors, in other words, manufacturing, where you make stuff and you sell it to people all over the state, all over the world, that's great because it's bringing money into Buncombe County. In the same way with leisure and hospitality. I mean, you generally, and it hasn't been this way because people may have been, needed some shelter from the storm, staying in hotel rooms, but that is kind of not as much a thing anymore, is that people from the outside come spend money in your restaurants when they come to visit in your hotels. So that's generally bringing my money in. So we want to strengthen those sectors, but we also want to make sure that we have a diversified economic strategy so you're not totally dependent on any one sector. And you can see here the spread, the order of this is in order of what are the biggest sectors in Buncombe County from, these are the 5 biggest sectors in Buncombe County. In the private sector, this excludes government. So you see here, kind of a mixed bag, but clearly some things to think about. It's a good thing as the service sector economy goes, it's counterbalanced some of these other issues. And then we look at all those things are based on surveys, based on, so it's not a total count. These are unemployment insurance claims in Buncombe County. And this is real data. This is people, and it is not every unemployed person, but it's those unemployed person who are eligible to get either regular unemployment insurance or disaster unemployment insurance. The rule of disaster unemployment insurance is you have to look, if you're eligible for regular unemployment insurance, you get that first. And if you're not eligible for that, then you get disaster unemployment insurance. So look at this. In September, basically, you had 262 people. By November, that number had gone up by 20-fold to 5,200 overall. In addition to those 5,200 people on regular UI, you had about 1,000 people who had on disaster unemployment insurance, probably because they weren't eligible for some reason for the regular program. But then in January, you say, oh, Dan, look, if I just look at regular unemployment insurance, it's falling. But you see where disaster unemployment insurance basically doubled from December to January. People were running out of the regular unemployment insurance benefits, not being able to get back and find a job. So they came eligible for disaster unemployment insurance. And I run this through March because the disaster unemployment insurance program ended in March. But it is suffice to say that if anybody doubts about the economic damage here, it is these claims actually show you that Buncombe County went from one of the lowest per capita in the state to the highest. So I think things to ponder with the economy is you ponder this and understand that the stabilization, it seems, okay, we're around January, February, like, oh, maybe we're out of this. But there's a stubbornness to this kind of, we gotten better, but we're not really getting much more better. So one of the things wondered about is if people are coming in, doing the reconstruction work, doing the emergency workers, whatever, is this stabilization real, is it short-lived, right? And so that's why what we can't forget here in Raleigh and in Washington and in other places outside of the West is the job is not yet done. It's like a lot of good is accomplished. This is clearly not, September 29th anymore, September 28th or 29th when you woke up in the county, but it is not, back to, August of 2023, 2024 either. Hospitality and retail recover. I mean, my own personal belief here is that hospitality has just got crushed. It's really surprising to me that it hasn't yet come back. The governor was just on a late night show with Stephen Colbert. I'm old. I watched it on videotape. I didn't watch it live, but encouraging people to come back to the West and continue to market on that. And that continues to be a theme down here. But if the things that make Buncombe County worth visiting, not just once, but over and over again, the kind of the je ne sais quoi about Buncombe County, I mean, that's what you want to drive people back. There are mountains in a lot of places, but there's only one kind of specialness about Buncombe County and its municipalities. Can the labor force remain stable? In other words, one of the things I think businesses are worried about, and have said anecdotally, is I can't find labor. Job openings are up in Buncombe County, as everybody just left. And I'm like, no, it's there. It's just going to take a while to get it back up and to make sure that you have enough business to do so. The Asheville Chamber did a survey on this. And the number one concern about businesses is will we have enough revenue to make it? And then after that, getting some help to make it. And then it goes on from there. But labor force is not as much. Finding the workers is not as high a priority. It always will be a priority, but not the highest priority is of kind of dealing with that need for revenue. And so what will make it better? I mean, yesterday, I think the news ran a story that Sharon Decker, the former Secretary of Commerce, who I think is taking a leave of absence, as I understand it, from the Tri and Equestrian Center down in Polk County, is going to help lead an effort. There are many efforts, but lead an effort to help. Okay, now we're here. How do we do this again? And how do we make the West even better? Preserve that as great, and just not only recover, but make it build back special. I'll say it that way. And so then, this is the trick. The trick is to know that when the media runs these stories about the 6-month anniversary and 8-month anniversary, and they'll run a year anniversary, you'll see all these pictures. What we don't want is for people everywhere to think that is how it is today. No, we've made a lot of progress. Yes, we're a good investment. Yes, we're a good bet, but we're not out of the woods yet. We need help. 29% of the tree cover in Buncombe County is lying there in the woods, right? Compared to before the storm. So we need to bring that back, and we still need a little bit of help to get us, but we are capable, and you're not throwing money down a hole. This is, an important part of the state to come back. The complacency of the false dawn, I talked a little bit about that, and the diversification. I talked about that as well, about the need to work on diversifying the economy. Madam Chair, I yield to you. I'm sorry if I've gone on too long, but happy to answer any questions if time is there, or to be quiet as you would request.
Thank you so much, Dan. This is incredibly informative, and I will see if any commissioners have questions for you.
I think, one question for you, Dan. Thank you again. You mentioned a few times, how to think about or how to ponder, coming back and what the future looks like. And I imagine you must have looked at examples of a situation somewhat analogous to what the West has seen, in order for you to kind of analyze where we've come from and where we might go from here. And so I guess I'm wondering what do you look like? What examples have you looked to compare us and our economic metrics from the hurricane?
Well, Commissioner Sloan, thanks for that question. Twofold answer to that. One is that the comparison is to the work that I did when I was president of the Golden Leaf Foundation around the transition between Governor McCrory, and then Governor Cooper, is when Hurricane Matthew hit the eastern part of the state. And there's some worries about how to manage that transition. And so the Golden Leaf Foundation was asked by the General Assembly to handle some of the recovery aspects. And then also around Hurricane Florence to handle some of that. I think the lessons we've learned on this are that the focus, and the city of Asheville has their own CDBG-DR plan. The state has a CDBG-DR plan. Both of those plans have been improved to get that housing moving back as fast as possible, right? Because if you see swinging of hammers come building season, I think that's going to do a lot to encourage people that it's coming back, instead of getting lost in this kind of questions of the East of what is it ever really going to come back, and are we going to have this kind of dispiritedness, because we had that big community spirit right out of the storm that has to be maintained. So I think the importance here and the singularity of focusing on getting that housing started first is important. The second thing is this is the first storm we've had, Commissioner Sloan, post-COVID of this size. So it's a lot different, right? Because now you've had some money invested. The federal government have been very generous. That time is about to come to a crashing end, but very generous. So it's allowed the region to build up some things. But I think now is a time to think about, well, with our businesses that took on all these loans during COVID, really they're to a point where they might need some kind of non-traditional assistance. The state has been reluctant to offer grants in the past to businesses during that just wasn't a thing pre-COVID, hurricane or not. Maybe some exceptions around the New Orleans storms and stuff, but generally to look at that and just accept the reality, if we don't secure these businesses, if people don't have a place to work, if visitors don't have a place to go, If we can't export and bring in money from other places, we'll have to do so. So that I think is a thing that's not quite analogous. And the third is, I don't think everybody's doing this perfect. There's no example to go to and look like, oh yes, that's what we want, from Houston or Louisiana or the tornadoes or Sandy or anything. There's nobody who's gotten this right without testing the patience of the residents, the communities, and so forth. So I think what the West does better than anybody else, because it's had to be so self-reliant, is have these kind of networks built into it of trying to come back and to be strong. So I would say that the history is not based on what we've learned from other storms. We're going to fix that, but the history of the West itself, through the collaboration, the Appalachian Regional Commission and others, is how do we kind of build this back and show the interconnectedness. And finally, the final point I would say is that the storms we've experienced in North Carolina for a long time generally have not been focused on an area like Asheville that is so central to so much of the economic activity around it. And of course, there's people who say, have kind of look upon Buncombe, and it kind of, there's some feelings about that other people from outside may have about it and say, oh, they got all the attention and everything. But I'm like, well, we better give them some of the attention, or else, because what happens at Buncombe affects not only the people within your county, but the people, and kind of in the circumference that got hit as hard as well. So I think those are the things that I would think about. But I would not get too locked into finding that shining image on the hill, because I don't believe it exists.
Thank you, Dan. Several of us attended the Chamber of Commerce's annual meeting last night, and a lot of the data that you provided to us has backed up the anecdotal stories that we heard from so many business owners last night. I have a quick question for you, though. You've been doing this for a while. So what pitfalls, mistakes do you often see elected leaders make post-storm that inhibits the rebuilding of communities?
Okay, so
Not a loaded
I
question
I
at
think
all, Dan.
yeah, no, I think it's a great question, Commissioner, and what I would say, I think the mistakes are that people want to help you. That speed is not what you're going to want it to be. Acting locally as you have done is I mean, what your manager has done is textbook case. I mean, what she did, I just tell you, is one of the strongest examples of leadership in the storm I've seen. Because in the East, when the storm comes in and the storm goes out, that's it. You know where the flooding is you know where to expect it, you know where you've had the problems before and so forth. Helene is just a lot different. And I think to remind people that you are not just a victim of this, but you have been there time and time again to help people from other places. Now you need a little help. So I think that is a mistake they make, is do not portray yourself as a victim, but as an investment. That's lesson one. Lesson two is to explain is like, look, we are invested ourselves. We are not, we have done all these things. We will make progress here because we want to continue to be that kind of special area of the state that makes North Carolina so wonderfully diverse and so wonderful, such a great place to be. But we need a little bit of help in doing that. And third is I tell people, and this funny coming from me, has made a living in policy and foundations and stuff like that, is do not let the perfect be the enemy of the good here. Do something. And so my encouragement, frankly, it is not, I'm not paid by Grow and See or anything, but my encouragement to them, and my belief is what I've told, especially the Raleigh-based people, I said, your job is to go to all these state agencies that the General Assembly has provided money to and say, is the money moving to the West? What can we do to help you move the money to the West? And is there something we need to do different to move the money to the West? Because some of these programs have been set up, quite frankly, hurriedly. And then you realize, FEMA already did that. Or, that's not as much a need. That might have been good in October, but it's not what we need in April. And I think the third thing is is that people think that they have been forgotten. And as the next storms come, and they will come, and they may hit a different part of the state, is to remind each other that let's keep going here, right? And if you look just a little bit to your west, in Haywood County, where Tropical Storm Fred hit, that stuff is still going, and just to keep at it and to do not despair.
Thank you, Dan. Commissioners,
Yeah.
are there further questions?
I have one.
Yes, go Commissioner
And
Whiteside.
hi, it's Al Whitesides. The question I have is, what advice could you give us when it comes to getting the word up the communication stream that we need grants to keep our small businesses alive and not loans? That's the last thing most of them need when you look at COVID and what we've been going through is another loan. Not to mention how slow, and I can tell you from 40 years of banking, I never liked to deal with SBA because it was just too slow for me. But how do we get that word up? Because I'm concerned, and when you look at the tourist industry and what we are up against here, our small businesses are key, even to a lot of our tourists, the artists and all of that. But how can
Yes.
we get the word upstream? Look, we need grants.
Commissioner Whitesides, I'm going to be just direct with you. Is the way to do that is that the General Assembly, I think, has some concern about precedent, and they have some concern about, whether or not they can constitutionally give money to businesses, right? Is this a private endowment? And my answer to that is twofold. One is like, look, the General Assembly has been generous at giving money for agriculture for our farmers. I am pro-farmer. I love the farmers. I am all for money to the farmers. But the farmers are not nonprofits and they're not governmental entities. But the General Assembly and Congress have recognized that they need help because of their crop losses, because some of their infrastructure. What's their infrastructure? Their apple trees are gone. I mean, it's not like they're knocked over. They're gone. Their land is gone. The Christmas trees are gone. I mean, if you're on the wrong side of the slope. So I think you have already said that you understand that there is private individuals and businesses such as our farms that are so integral to what we do that they need straight out help. And I don't think that money's moving fast enough to satisfy any farmer in the West, by the way. But I would say with businesses, it's the same thing. Plus, as you know, as I know, Governor Stein used some of his unmet needs money to match some of the Dogwood Health Trust and the Duke Endowment and some other partners to help give some small grants to some businesses as well through a program administered through the CDFI. So we've already done this. In COVID, we've done this. In economic development, we do this. Just some guarantees to say is, hey, look, if you're a business that's going to remain open, if you're a business that's going to keep people employed, maybe we'll give you this money and maybe we'll call it a loan, but we'll forgive it if you're able to stay open. So I think there's ways to get this, sir. I think the House of Representatives in legislation that body passed, the State House of Representatives, they did have grants in it. So I think there is I think that message is getting through, sir. I think the message of small businesses that you're echoing is not lost, and it's not lost on me. It's not lost on a lot of people in Raleigh.
Good, thanks.
Anything else for Dan?
Dan, one more question for you. You mentioned as a question, will the labor force bounce back? And I'm curious, I guess, A, what does that look like? How will we know? Will we know in time before before the trend gets worse? And B, is there anything that county government can do to help with that?
Well, I think, the quality of life is important here, right? Is to say is like, look, if we can help figure out ways for these, there's two schools of thought on here, Commissioner Sloan. One is, I believe the Gerlach theory is we need demand. Is that we need to give those restaurants and hotels and and the artists and everybody else sense that there's going to be enough demand to allow them to open. Because as we know from the Asheville Chamber survey, that a lot of businesses have come back, but they're not fully open. So people are not, are they like, am I going to get enough hours? Am I going to be able to get paid enough? Is this going to be stable enough? Dan believes demand side. We need to generate more demand, and the county can do that and is doing that. And that is important as we come up to the summer season, as we come up into the fall. Because at least around you, the Blue Ridge Parkway, which is a bigger problem for other areas of the West, is not, there's some areas open around, and you have a lot more besides the BRP, as crucial as it is in Buncombe County. And then the second thing, but the other theory is that, oh, look, there are all these openings and businesses can't find people to take these jobs. And so they think it's a supply issue. They think, oh, the labor force is gone. And what I don't believe that's right, because I believe there's no other data to collaborate that. But I do believe what the county can do is, how can we help encourage our workforce development board and others to say is there some way to job match to make sure that people know, if they're looking for work, they'll do so. I think, frankly, with the end of the disaster unemployment assistance program, that as we see more data, sir, we're going to see people generally trend back. And what will facilitate that is people knowing that the demand will be solid enough to do that. So I think one is encouraging people to come, and two, increasing the quality of life, and three is maybe figuring out creative ways to make sure there's ways to get people to match people looking for work with the jobs.
Thanks, Dan. I'll tell my wife we need to go out to eat more often. I think that's one thing.
That's great. Any further questions? Dan, thank you for spending a chunk of your afternoon with us. We really appreciate it. This is incredible information, and thanks for all that you're doing to provide it to us.
Well, thank you for all your leadership and your service, and a challenging time. But I mean, look, it's every time I come to Asheville, and I love to come to Asheville. I mean, every time I see more. So I'm excited about your progress. Look forward to working with you on it in the months to come.
Thanks so much, Dan. We appreciate it. We welcome you to visit us anytime.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Have a good day, y'all.
Thanks, you too. All right, we will move on to our next agenda item, which is our county investment policy update. And Melissa Moore is on her way to give us more information.
Hello, good afternoon. So tonight I will brief you on the recommendations to update our investment policy. So the investment policy was last updated or adopted in 2020. So the presentation, I'll go through some of the changes, or the changes that are recommended. And then the next step would be to bring it back on the June 17th agenda and regular meeting for adoption of those changes. So the county's investment advisory firm, Valley View, went through our investment policy and made some recommendations. And we went through those with our team and with our financial advisors to kind of collaborate on how to kind of really modernize our investment policy. So some of the changes throughout the policy were to just really kind of make the language a little clearer. An example is the old policy had a section called scope. That content is the same. It's now just referred to under purpose. The word securities throughout the policy, numerous appearance of that word has been replaced with the word investments, just to make it more generalized. There is a section in there that referred to investment officer. We don't technically have an investment officer, so we've updated that. We've also defined where it had referenced other employees. We've given that more definition to refer to specific employees, such as my team within that. We've removed some procedural language within the delegation of authority. It just went into some details that were not really at the policy level. So continuing with just the subject of making the policy language clearer, we've removed some procedural language about competitive bid process. Within the internal control section, we've revised the section. Instead of calling it control of collusion, avoidance of collusion. Removed the physical delivery of securities. It's kind of outdated. They don't actually physically deliver the securities anymore. We've removed fax and replaced it with email for confirmation, for wire confirmation. We added a section for collateral. This collateral section is nothing new, but it does align with state guidelines, and so we felt like it would, to make our policy more comprehensive, to include that as well. Some of the more substantive adjustments to this policy are within your investment type. There's some language that was a little bit duplicative. We removed under several investment types the bullet for 5-year limit for investment types. There's actually a section that refers to that limit, so we're not changing the limit, we're just making it clearer instead of repeating it numerous times by investment type, which is standalone under this section for a maximum maturity section. We've removed the total portfolio percentage threshold under the state of North Carolina, so that as an investment type, we removed the total amount that we can invest within the state investments. Also within CDs and bank deposits, we've removed that total portfolio percentage. And we've also removed banker's acceptance. So we've added under the section for prohibited investments, we've added stocks and cryptocurrencies. We removed investment pool section. Investment pools are included as an investment type. But the section was removed. All of that stuff is governed by your state treasurer's office and your local government commission. Under the risk and management and diversification, removed the 5% total portfolio for any single issuer. That is covered by each investment type. So some of those investment types will have different types of percentages. So instead of it ever contradicting anything within the language, we removed that from the risk management diversification section. We've removed some language referring to the downgrade of security. And we removed performance standards related to setting an index as a market benchmark. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Melissa, can you just give us more details about those last two, why you removed the downgrade security language and then the performance standards? Those 2 points.
Let me go back to my specific notes. So I know that on the last one about the setting the index as a market benchmark, when I bring you the investment report each quarter, there's a table in there and it'll have a line item that, and I want to say it references the Bank of America benchmark. Well, once the interest rate market went to a negative yield curve, some of that benchmark stopped really making sense and stopped really maximizing our ability to earn the most on our portfolio. So when we would start seeing a performance index, kind of our benchmark of where we hope to kind of keep our total portfolio performing was at like 3%, but our investment pools were almost at 5%. It really kind of started saying like, why are we making it a policy standard to hit that benchmark when we're far exceeding it already? I think that intention of that benchmark fit very well when the market was in a very different condition. So we removed that because, as you've seen, when the market changes, it wasn't really advantageous for us. So on the downgrade of security language, hold on, I don't want to misspeak. I want to say that it was already covered under a different section, and I apologize. Yes, some of that language is already covered under the grade of each security. Some of that is already covered within previous sections.
And then on going back to where the investment types, can you just speak a little bit more to you removed the 5-year limit on investment types and then removed total portfolio percentages and the banker's acceptance. Can you just speak a little bit more to those decisions as well, please?
Sure. So within the, let's see, for the 5-year, not to exceed 5 years, we removed that from federal, so obligations under United States obligations. It was also under a previous policy under a different type of federal, like farm credit and different types of like Fannie Mae and those things. It was also included under there. We just removed that. It's referred to under a separate individual section. Part under the obligations that are backed by the state of North Carolina, we removed where it previously said no more than 5% of your total portfolio may be vested in securities of any single issuer, meaning for that section would be the state of North Carolina. It really just, the intention initially was to maintain a certain level of diversification. The next section under the investment type was to also remove that language for CDs. So as longer-term investments were no longer advantageous to us, where short-term we're paying quite a bit more percentage-wise. We were earning a lot more investment income. We were starting to get limited by our policy of taking advantage of putting more money in CDs because we were exceeding that 5%. Yet that was the most advantageous opportunity for us to earn interest income. And so that just removing that really doesn't put us to where we're now allowed to put all our eggs in one basket, any of that. It does allow us to take advantage of wherever the market takes us. Gives us a little bit more flexibility.
All right. Thank you. Those were my questions. And just if y'all could send that to us this week, just so we have time to read over it before it comes back to
For the
us, that would be
17th.
helpful.
Yes. Are there any other questions for Melissa?
Oh, Melissa, I'm glad to see that we are changing, looking at the investment policy and the way the world is changing now. And hopefully we won't wait 5 more years to look at it.
We try to look at it every year, sir.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Melissa. And we'll look forward to seeing this again before we take a vote on the 17th. All right. E.B. Otterstall and Sarah Odio is with us in person to talk about our Ferry Road recommendations.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. There you go. Thank you for your time today. We will be presenting an update about the Ferry Road community. I'm here with Sarah Odio from the Development Finance Initiative at the School of Government with UNC Chapel Hill. For our update, I wanted to start today with a brief history of the property. The property was acquired by the county in 2015 as an economic development opportunity. In 2021, the board at that time re-envisioned the property as an affordable housing development. And the county went through a process to engage the community and determine the community's priorities for the property, which were landed on conservation, affordable housing, and recreation. During that process, we also engaged Equinox to do a land use study and develop several proposals, which the board then voted on to determine the path going forward for the community. After establishing a vision for the property, the county engaged DFI to begin pre-development work and also make the site attractive for a future development partner. As a part of that process last year, staff worked through the City of Asheville's entitlement process to rezone the property and ensure it aligned with the land use study. And we also worked in collaboration with DFI to develop a developer solicitation, release it, and then also begin the process of receiving proposals. We did receive 2 proposals, and then the process was delayed by Helene. In April of this year, we re-engaged, and staff have worked with DFI to do an evaluation of proposals, and we are here today to present the results of that evaluation process. here I have just the top of the solicitation. The solicitation is a means to describe the project to potential developers. It outlines the guiding public interests that were established through public engagement. It also outlined our goals for the property, and it also, in the future, will allow us to look back with the developer and make sure that we all have the same expectations for the project. For those guiding public interests, through public engagement, we determined that the property should create a diverse, mixed-income, multi-generational community, be a model for sustainability and stewardship by conserving at least 55% of the site's natural resources, be a hub and connector for recreational opportunities, and provide equitable access to residents, provide equitable transportation access, and prioritize pedestrian and bicyclists, include commercial or service-oriented uses that are harmonious with residential uses, and optimize public investment and attract private investment. The solicitation also outlined our development goals for the property, which you can see here. The goal is to create 645 total units of housing, both rental and home ownership units, while prioritizing affordability. Over half of the rental units outlined would be affordable, and there's also opportunities for additional affordability with the homeownership units. And with that, I'll pass it over to Sarah. She will go through the evaluation process.
All right, so I want to get really kind of detailed about what work went into actually comparing responses to ensure that you're finding the right partner to work with in the long run. And so the evaluation process was really digging pretty deep into the proposals that were received, looking at everything from the layouts, whether they actually work, what they're recommending, the financials, the level of public investment that they're requesting. We also had a good amount of time because of the delay to check references for the 2 responses that were received. There were follow-up questions, right? Responses. These proposals are one attempt. There are always clarifying questions that came after that. Equinox, who did all of that preliminary work and knows the site better than anyone, really, spent a good amount of time reviewing the 2 proposals and letting us know where something that's in there might cause or have an impact on costs down the line that wasn't caught. We then received feedback from everybody basically in the county. I think we talked to most people here, most departments, to try to get a sense of how does this fit within your plans? What do you see here that could affect you all? And then of course, the big part was interviewing the 2 teams to make sure that, hey, which one of these partners is going to be the right one in the long run for the county? I put this disclaimer in here because it's very important to note. These proposals will go public. Everyone will get very excited about it, but keep in mind that these are really great indicators of how a development team thinks, what kind of partner they might be, how well they understand your goals, but they are not going to be, what project that eventually happens is not going to be exactly what you see in this proposal, right? We do want to hold the developers accountable to what they put in that proposal, but with time, costs might change. There might be shifts in things like interest rates that really can have a major impact. And so keeping that in mind, you all are picking a partner, a master development partner to work with in the long run, but it's going to be a back and forth. And there will be an evolution of what you see in the proposals. There were 2 proposals received, 2 development teams. So the development agreement, or the agreement between the county and a developer, will be with the top of the line here, right? The master developer. One of the proposals came from Lansing Melbourne Group, or LMG is how they usually go by. That team included LMG on the multifamily component and the horizontal development, with Volunteers of America National Services. They are a low-income housing tax credit developer, along with Habitat for Humanity of Asheville. There was a team that included some local architects and people, statewide expertise that came in as well. The other team, so again, this would be with the master developer, includes Urban Atlantic as the master developer, working in partnership with Mountain Housing Opportunities and DRB Group Dan Ryan Builders for the home building. They also have a team of architects and engineers that consulted on these proposals. So with that, I'm actually going to hand it over back to Evie to make a recommendation.
While discussing and assessing the two proposals, staff looked back to our guiding public interests to ensure that the selection aligned with what we were looking for in the project initially. So we assessed on this list here whether we thought the proposal aligned with our priorities. I think what floated to the top in the conversation were really aligning with the guiding public interest as a whole. Will the proposal meet the guidelines that we were put to task? And we are also really looking to assess whether the master development partner had the experience bringing together a project of this magnitude and the size, as well as within a reasonable timeline. And with that, based off of our assessment, staff would like to recommend Urban Atlantic as the master development partner for Ferry Road. We believe that their experience really came through as an asset, and that they would be able to deliver this project and execute our plans. They highlighted an ability to really have a mixed community, which was one of our guiding public interests. And as I mentioned, we believe that their timeline was reasonable and flexible enough to respond to changes in our environment. And Sarah will go over a few more of the details about Urban Atlantic's experience and their proposal.
Part of the reason we're switching back and forth so that no one thinks that I'm with Urban Atlantic. DFI or third party, right? So Urban Atlantic, not here today. They are a master developer that has done master community development in the past. So you can see here some examples from the DC area where they did and we say, mixed income, meaning having market rate units as well as restricted units for low-income households, and also a mix of product types. So it includes, they've done projects that include office and retail as well as that residential home ownership and retail. There is a lot of complexity that goes into mixing types and mixing incomes. And so the fact that they had this experience was something that really stood out in that proposal. They also partnered with Mountain Housing Opportunities that I'm sure you all are familiar with. They are a low-income housing tax credit development nonprofit based in Asheville. And here are some examples of projects that they've done. They have done home building as well, which is part of what they will be working on, which is the affordable home building component, as well as the low-income housing tax credit. So I'm going to sit on this plan for a minute. This is the proposed plan. I will say again, a reminder, this is just a proposal at this point, but I will go through some of the key components here. So in their proposal, they, of course, number one, so all of the green area basically on the periphery, that is the 72 plus acres of land that will be publicly conserved. So this is not part of the private development plan, and Urban Atlantic would not be involved in that component. This is still going to be county driven along with all of the trails and everything that will go with that. If we look at sections 2 and 3, where you can see the larger buildings on that plan, this is a mix of apartment buildings. Okay, these are multifamily apartment buildings, rental. And what they did here and what they included in this proposal is that the buildings themselves would be alternated. So one building would be market rate, meaning unrestricted, right? We don't know where the rents will end up. We have a sense of the market. And then another building would be using the low-income housing tax credit program to have units that are affordable and restricted to low-income households. And so the plan here is that these buildings are actually alternating one to the other. At the center of this, you could see that there is a central green next to the number 5. To the left of that central green around that will be where the senior low-income housing tax credit units are, so affordable to senior households. This is also where the community amenities are located, and what's key here is that they are part of the market rate component and they will be open to everyone community-wide. So homeowners and renters will have access to the amenities that are part of that market rate component. If you go to the number 4, so going down the ridges from the heart of the development, coming off of Brevard Road, which I should have noted that earlier, we have moving into kind of the home ownership section. And this is a mix of housing types, including townhomes and duplexes, and it's also a mix of affordability. So some of these, again, market rate at whatever they can sell for, and a portion of them selling exclusively to low-income homeowners. I'm going to go back to number 5 at the heart of the plan, which is space that is currently reserved for the hopes of having a daycare or a healthcare provider of some kind. Their proposal does not include a partner for this space yet, and who that might be. So that is to be determined who would go into that space. I want to show you the breakdown of the affordability of these units. So similar to the solicitation, there are about 530 rental units, with about 54 reserved for extremely low-income households earning 30% of your area's median income. You have about 108 that are reserved for that low-income, 50% of the area median income, and 108 for these more moderate-income households at 80% of the area median income. The balance, 260 units, would be market rate, again, unrestricted for anyone and everyone. Of the 115 home ownership units, again, the same number from the solicitation, about 38 of these homes would be reserved for low-income households, with about 41 targeting middle income, so that 80 to 120% income price point, and then 36 at that market rate. Reminder, these numbers may change, the distribution may change, your preference may change, and that changes the numbers as we go down the line. This is the timeline that they proposed. This was submitted in September of 2024, so we are delayed. So just expect that anything that is done will be delayed. But what they are proposing is really a 5-year timeline, which is something that makes sense, with a lot of time going into the front end, pre-development, preparing the land, then going into that phase 1 construction, getting those multifamily buildings constructed, both the market rate and the affordable at the same time, which is nice to see. And then the for-sale homes will come in the last phase, and the expectation should be that those sort of roll out. So the apartments happen at once, the homes get, as you've seen, subdivisions get built, right? You get a chunk that goes out and then another chunk. So we are expecting about a 6-month delay, and so I would say that what we would expect as a third party to see is that late 2031 is realistic to have a completed community, but things happen. So what they have in their proposal is total development cost for the entire community build out, excluding, of course, the public area that is still public. This is for the private development only, about $160 million plus, because all of the home building is not accounted for thoroughly at this point. They have attributed to the county and requested $19 million in county funding. We like to note and point out in looking at their proposal that there are other funding sources included that are not as reliable as the county and that may not be available in 2 or 3 years. I always use the example of the workforce housing loan program. It is not in the current budget and will not be available next year as it stands. That may change, but that is a source that we have identified and said this is part of the funding gap. And so 19 million already attributed to the county, plus about 7 million that have been attributed to other sources that may not be available. And so it is a total potential funding gap of roughly 26 million. That is about 84,000 per affordable unit. All public investment must be tied to low moderate income households as part of this work. And they are proposing a purchase price to purchase the market rate land from the county. They would pay roughly $4.2 million for that land. All of the land reserved for affordable low-income housing tax credit development would likely, and this is going to get negotiated out, be through a ground lease at a nominal cost to the development. I'm going to flag some, I keep saying this, but I really want to be super clear about this. The market is uncertain. Anyone trying to buy a house right now knows that. Anyone trying to rent a place knows that. Costs will shift. We expect to see that. The proposals that we got from both developers did their best to try to project into the future, but we don't know. Assume that there is likely a property tax exemption for the affordable components. If you all have a preference for deeper affordability than what you saw there, or any other income mix, there would be a change in the funding gap that you see. One of the things that the proposal assumed is the availability of project-based vouchers. We did that as part of the solicitation as well, but that is to be determined whether the Housing Authority makes the choice to place these vouchers on these developments. Again, we don't know who the daycare and healthcare clinic provider may be at this point. And I've got to flag it, the county's statutory authority to do any of this, all of that is dependent on the exact details of the approach. So devil's in the detail, and that will all be determined through the negotiation process. So I'll hand this back to EB to bring it home.
Next, you'll see us at the June 17th regular meeting. We'll be requesting your authorization for the county manager to enter into negotiations with the selected developer to develop a memorandum of understanding. The MOU is a non-binding agreement outlining each party's responsibilities and establishing milestones before we move towards a development agreement. The development agreement is the product of this whole process that we're working towards. Any questions?
Are there any questions for EB and Sarah? I think this is exciting to see that we're picking this back up despite a little delay that occurred in our community and being able to provide over 600 units that are desperately needed, particularly as we rebuild Buncombe County. And Sarah, it's delightful to see you in person. We'll see you back in 2 weeks.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, we have a continuum of care update with Lacey Hoyle.
Good
Lacey.
afternoon, Commissioners. It's good to be here again. I am here today with my quarterly update on homelessness response activities in the continuum of care. And I want to start us off today with a kind of a deep dive into the point-in-time count results for this year. So you all likely remember that the point-in-time count is a snapshot, a one-night snapshot count of folks who meet the federal definition of literal homelessness. So that's people who are in emergency shelters, folks in transitional housing, or those who are unsheltered. The federal requirements for the point-in-time count are that it be conducted every year. Our COC typically conducts it annually, and it has to be conducted within the last 10 days of January. Our jurisdiction for the point-in-time count is all of Buncombe County and its municipalities. So for this year's count, there was a street count conducted by volunteers and service providers the night of January 28th. And then on the 29th, there was a count in the daytime, as well as surveys conducted at various service provider locations. We had 135 volunteers, and this count is managed each year by the lead agency staff and volunteers. So before we kind of deep dive into specific data, I wanted to just zoom out a little bit and show you all this kind of representation of what our point-in-time count trends are looking like. So the blue at the bottom of each column represents the part of the PIT count that accounts for unhoused individuals who are staying in emergency shelter, transitional housing, and it also accounts for shelter overflow beds and code purple beds that might have been utilized on the night of the count. The peach color in each column at the top represents the count of unsheltered, unhoused individuals on the night of the pit count. And you can see here that we did experience a slight increase in our unsheltered count. I'm going to talk more about that in just a moment. And then finally on this graph, the blue line at the top represents the number of beds that are available in our community on the night of the pit count. So if the blue line is falling in the peach portion of the column, which you can see for the last 2 years it has been, that means that we had more unhoused individuals in the community than we had beds available. All right, so here's a preliminary look at our results. So you can see I've included last year's numbers, this year's numbers, as well as the net change. Starting at the top, somehow by strange coincidence, we had exactly the same number of folks in emergency shelter last year and this year, so no net change in that result. Transitional housing, we did lose 93 beds. That is largely due to the loss of the Veterans Restoration quarters due to flooding from the storm. And then our unsheltered number increased this year by 109 individuals. And 116 of that total 328 unsheltered this year reported that they are experiencing unsheltered homelessness because of Tropical Storm Helene. So the subtotal you see here is 16 additional people, so 755 folks in the point in time count this year. This year's count was a little bit different because we also had folks who were staying in FEMA's Transitional Sheltering Assistance Program on the night of that count, and HUD requirements necessitate that we count individuals who are experiencing homelessness and staying in hotels paid for by an agency or organization. So the lead agency worked with FEMA to get some aggregate data for the individuals who were staying in hotels through TSA on the night of January 28th. And you can see here that there was 1,548 individuals in the TSA program that night. We do know that the majority of those individuals were not experiencing homelessness prior to the storm, and we also know that most of those individuals exited that transitional sheltering assistance program into a transitional or permanent housing solution. HUD guidelines for that data indicate that the lead agency should extrapolate demographic data based on county census data, and that becomes part of the data that is submitted to HUD. However, as we look at some demographic data over the next few slides, I just want to note that the data that I'm going to be talking about today does not include the individuals who were in TSA on the night of the point in time count. So I want to just spend the next few moments looking at who is experiencing homelessness in the COC, starting with looking at self-reported race and ethnicity. The raw counts from last year to this year were not dramatically different in any category, so I am including percentages for 2024 and for 2025, and you can also see we've included some county census data from the American Community Survey from 2024, just for comparison. The largest change was a small drop in the number of individuals who report their race as white only experiencing homelessness, but you can see also that that group is still the largest in our PIT count, and that corresponds with data on our countywide population from the 2024 American Community Survey. When we look at that ACS data against the PIT count data, though, we see some concerning disparities this year. Although Black or African American individuals only represent 6% of our countywide population, this year they represented 17.6% of point-in-time count respondents, and that's a decrease of less than 1% from last year. And I also want to just point out that folks who identify as American Indian, Alaska Native, or Indigenous represent only 0.6% of the countywide population, but they were representing 2.1% of the PIT count. So, and this information, this data, and these disparities were shared in a review of this data with the COC membership back at the end of March, and then with the COC board at our meeting in April. And this will also be informing our COC work as we are working on our strategic plan, which I will be talking about a little bit more later, and starting to make plans for housing interventions and services for this population. Moving on to self-reported gender, we can also see here that there's a disproportionate amount of folks who identify as male experiencing homelessness in our community when we compare that to the 2024 census data, with 65.8% of point-in-time count respondents reporting male gender as compared to 48.2% of the county population. This is pretty consistent with historical PIT count data in our COC, and it is also consistent with data that we're seeing nationwide. More men are reportedly experiencing homelessness than women, with nationwide percentages looking really close to what we're seeing here in our COC. We also know that in general, men are more likely to experience unsheltered homelessness than women, and all of that information is also helpful for our COC to have as we are planning housing interventions in the community. And then just briefly looking at the age of folks responding to the PIT count, I think the most notable thing here is that the number of individuals under 18 who are experiencing homelessness, according to those HUD definitions, has halved this year from last year. And most of the other age groups have stayed very, very similar to last year's numbers. This year, I also wanted to just take a look at how the PIT count breaks down geographically, particularly as we're looking at this information in the context of how Helene might have affected this population. So I was looking at the volunteer routes for the PIT count to try to make some estimations. Those routes don't strictly follow city limit lines, so they are estimations. But it's not unexpected here that a large percentage of the folks responding to the PIT count are in Asheville city limits, 94.2%. We did see some small increases in the number of surveys collected in other areas, particularly Swannanoa and Barnersville this year. Just for context and as an example, I think that last year there were 2 surveys collected in Barnardsville versus around 16 this year. And while some of that increase probably is attributable to Helene, I also want to just note that our methodology for the PIT count continues to improve year over year. And so some of this difference might also be that we're collecting surveys from folks who may have been experiencing homelessness before the storm, but didn't participate in previous PIT counts. I know that, for example, the count in Barnardsville this year on the evening of the 28th was conducted by someone who's a member of that community, which turned out to be very helpful in data collection because that person had some knowledge of areas where unhoused folks were. And most importantly, I think that person had some rapport with those individuals, so they felt like they could trust them to answer those questions. I wanted to also just share some data on self-reported characteristics with you all. So these are some supplemental questions on the point-in-time survey. So each year, some folks elect not to answer these questions, and some folks do. And the point-in-time count doesn't require any kind of verification of this data. It is all self-reported. With that being said, I think the most significant increase that you can see in this table are folks who are reporting chronic homelessness, with an increase this year of 32 people, as well as folks with serious mental illness and substance use disorders. And again, this information is very helpful for us because it gives us more context with regards to the needs of the folks that we're trying to serve. And that helps inform the services we currently have, as well as, again, informing that planning effort that we're undertaking. Any questions from you all before I move on to other COC updates about the point-in-time count this year?
Yes, Lacey, I do have a couple of questions. First of all, on the families, there looked like there was a pretty significant decrease,
Yes.
which that was really good to see. Do you kind of have a sense of why? Is there something specific that helped with that with the families?
You know, I noticed that myself, and I think that because it's a snapshot count, it could be any number of things. I know that at that time, some of our shelter providers were working on some of the spaces where they often house families. So it could be that those families were in other locations. There were other service providers who had some Helene-related funding at that time and were housing families in hotels. So it could be something as simple as that.
And going back to the slide on the point-in-time trends, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this. So when we look at the 2025, it's like 427 was the shelter count, 328 was the unsheltered, and then the beds available, right? That's a little over 600 beds available. Am I reading that correctly?
It's a little over. I feel like it was maybe 612,
Okay.
something close to there.
And so, help me understand this. If we had 612 beds available, like, why didn't we have more sheltered there? Like, what am I missing with that gap between the sheltered and if we have more beds available
Yeah.
than what it's showing for sheltered?
That's a really good question. My guess would be that, you know, we know that there are folks who, for a variety of reasons, don't utilize existing shelter beds, even though they are available, and that's something that the COC is very aware of and constantly working on with providers. It could also be that the folks who needed shelter on that night maybe had a pet or were experiencing some other sort of qualification that prevented them from being able to enter those shelters. And again, it could also be some of the folks in those outerlying areas outside of Asheville city limits. You know, those folks were not often coming into town for shelter. Even for Code Purple shelter, we were working out in those communities to try to figure out some other options so that those folks didn't have to leave those communities. So,
Do we have, if we don't have it, do we have the ability to get a long-term picture of that, of the beds available, and are they actually being utilized?
yeah.
Like, you know, and so, because to your point, that's that one point in time. But I'm just curious, over the long term, is there some reason that the beds that we do have are not getting utilized by those who need it?
Before you answer that, can we put that slide back up, Lacey? Can we get back to that? Because
Yes,
I feel as if that peach color has been there throughout consistently.
it has been. I'm trying to get us back to it right now, but I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong. There we go. It has been there consistently, and you can see some years we had more beds than we had folks experiencing homelessness. And I want to stress again, too, that the pit count is not a perfect measure of data. It is a one-night count. So there's a lot to left to be desired in terms of our data collection. But with that being said, I think, you know, we can and are looking at utilization. That's something that we started, I think it was happening even before we were working on that, you know, shelter planning effort related to the county ARPA funding. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about new shelter planning efforts that are underway, and that kind of deep dive into the utilization and the reasons that those beds are not being utilized, as well as how we can support providers in increasing that utilization is going to be a big part of that work too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions for Lacey before she moves on? All right, let's keep going. Thanks, Lacey.
I don't know if I'm controlling the, there we go. All right, so next I wanted to just give a brief update on HUD Continuum of Care funding in our community. This is federal funding that supports homelessness and housing programs. It represents a large chunk of our COC's funding for these services. This application is typically due to HUD in late September, early October. We were able to get an extension for our submission of this application this year, which meant that our COC board approved our consolidated application for fiscal year '24 in November. And so most of the activities for fiscal year '24 are going to start in January of 2026. And we received our award notifications in early April. So the way that this application works is that providers submit individual applications, and then the COC funding committee reviews those applications and ranks those by priority based on a scorecard that is created by out of recommendations from HUD and then from the funding committee members. And then those projects are put into tiers, so there's tier 1 projects and tier 2, and then we submit those applications all together as a consolidated application for the COC, and then HUD makes a determination about those projects based on the tiers and our ranking. So I wanted to just show here, so we received a little less funding this year than last year. That is pretty typical for the program nationwide. It's not, I don't think that that's really suggesting anything about our COC in particular. And I wanted to just point out that we had 2 homeward bound permanent supportive housing programs that were in tier 2 and were not awarded funding. And that as a result, they are not receiving about $290,000 that they typically would be receiving, which translates to about 17 households total. And that's a net loss also of our inflow capacity for permanent supportive housing for folks who are chronically homeless. Homeward Bound is actively working on problem solving for those 17 households, figuring out other funding sources that can be utilized, and talking with other stakeholders. And they are also talking with the COC board so that we can figure out solutions. I don't think that this means that those 17 households are going to lose housing. We just have to get creative and figure out where that funding is going to come from next. A new rapid rehousing project for domestic violence survivors was approved. So that's around $89,000, which translates to about 4 households. And then there was also a renewal of rapid rehousing for domestic violence survivors and around $307,000 approved for that renewal. And then the city of Asheville received a planning grant and some funding to support their efforts with HMIS, which is their data collection for homeless services. Any questions about that? Awesome.
Doesn't appear so.
Sorry?
No questions.
Okay, great. And then I also wanted to just share some of the board's activity over the past quarter. First, there is still work continuing to fill some vacant COC board seats. There are 4 vacant seats right now for a community member, business community, faith community, and local non-governmental funders. Applications for those board seats are still open, and the nominating and membership committee is actively engaged in a recruitment process to try to find folks who may be interested in filling those seats. I also wanted to just share that the Housing Authority's interim CEO, Rodney Norman, is currently serving in the HACA appointed seat in an interim capacity. The current version of the charter does not have specific guidance regarding interim service on the board, so board officers decided that Mr. Norman would serve as a non-voting liaison to the board. And then once HACA selects a permanent appointee for that seat, that person will be able to participate in board voting. There have been 2 new work groups established since the last time I was here to update you all. The first is a healthcare work group, and the aim of that group is to help improve collaboration and problem solving, and to support medical and behavioral health care providers who are working with folks experiencing homelessness, and in particular providers who are at service provider sites providing care. And then the second is a new shelter planning work group. So the COC board voted to disband the previous shelter work group. That work group was formed outside of the normal COC process for seating committees and work groups. And it was done that way so that we could respond quickly to the county ARPA funding opportunity that had presented itself with a timeline right around the time the new COC was formed. Emergency shelter was recently identified as a high priority for both the membership body and the COC board during the strategic planning process, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in just a moment. And concurrently, the City of Asheville's action plan for their CDBG DR funding names emergency shelter as an eligible activity under the infrastructure category. So there's an opportunity here to create an updated plan that could utilize some of that funding to continue to expand our emergency shelter capacity. So the members of this new shelter planning work group were confirmed by the board at our May meeting. I am excited that I will be part of that group of folks. And we have our first meeting this Thursday, actually. So the work of that group is to generate a plan of action for expanding shelter capacity, and in particular, to expand low barrier shelter capacity, potentially utilizing this funding opportunity to do so. Additionally, the COC board has voted to adopt a plan for compensating people with lived experience of homelessness. So this plan outlines a preliminary structure for compensation for folks who are subject matter experts and who are appointed as board members or to committees and work groups. And funding has not yet been secured to put the compensation plan in action, but the funding committee and the lead agency have identified some potential funding sources that they are investigating and planning to make application to in accordance with grant requirement timelines for those funding sources. The board also selected Goodwill Industries as the fiscal agent for the COC. And so those Goodwill will oversee the process associated with compensation of people with lived experience of homelessness once that funding source is secured. And then I wanted to just share a little bit about our strategic plan process and what the draft is looking like. So back in January, we invited the membership body to give input on the strategic plan and what they felt our highest priorities should be. And then the COC board participated in some strategic planning sessions that were facilitated by HUD technical assistants who've been supporting us throughout the COC restructure. And then in April, we received a draft of a 3-year strategic plan and were invited to give some feedback on that. At our May meeting, we reviewed that feedback and made some suggestions for revisions. And now we will be presented with a draft to adopt as our official strategic plan at our meeting next week on June 12th. So this plan is structured around 4 objectives, and I've listed those here for you: decrease unsheltered homelessness, increase exits from homelessness to permanent housing, coordinate and expand homelessness prevention, diversion, and rapid rehousing, and building housing-focused system capacity. Each of these objectives has 3 strategies outlined and then associated action steps for each strategy. The strategies will be assigned to a COC board member for oversight, and the actions are assigned to formal COC bodies like committees and work groups to lead implementation. And then finally, I just wanted to make sure you all knew about our next meeting. So the COC board will meet in person next week on June 12th from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. at the Harris Cherokee Center Banquet Hall. And then the membership meeting will also be in person June 18th from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. And just as a reminder, your county representatives to the COC board are Commissioner Horton, who is sitting in a non-voting liaison seat, and then myself sitting in the Buncombe County staff appointed seat. Any questions for me?
I do have one question. I know all along we've talked about the coordinated entry and how important that is, and can you share any updates on how that's proceeding, please?
Yes. So there is a coordinated entry work group that was seated some time ago. And then we had applied for some technical assistance through HUD. There was unfortunately a lot of stopping and starting with that technical assistance at the beginning of this year because of federal budget changes and all of that. We recently got word that we are going to be receiving that technical assistance. We've been assigned to a technical assistance provider, and the coordinated entry work group is beginning to work with that technical assistance provider to look at what our current system is like and what we need to change to make it more efficient. So that is work we had a little bit of a stalling out through no fault of our own, unfortunately, but we're starting to get that going again now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks to Commissioner Horton for serving on this really important board.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you, Lacey. You
Absolutely.
did an amazing job.
Thanks.
Any further questions? All right, thank you, Lacey, and also Commissioner Horton. We appreciate your work on this. All right, I think we have one more agenda item, and Jackie Hempstead is joining us for Energy Efficiency and Conservation Grant.
All right. Hello, I'm Jackie. I'm with the Office of Sustainability, and just a quick update on North Carolina EECBG grant award to fund battery storage at 35 Woodfin. So EECBG stands for Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant. This particular one is funded through the North Carolina State Energy Office. We did get an EECBG grant directly from the DOE last year, but this is a different pot of money. The award is for $225,000, which is what we asked for in our application, and there's no local match for the county. The project is for turnkey design and installation of roughly 180 kilowatt hour battery storage system. And this project really started with the 2024 electrification feasibility study, which identified 35 Woodfin as one of the buildings that would have a high ROI on a battery storage project. Also part of that feasibility study, we sat down with our contracted engineer and we assessed different battery manufacturers and installers. And that's gonna really help us write our RFP for this project, because we could do some side-by-side comparisons of different batteries and their safety features. And so we feel better prepared for this project. Why do we want batteries? One, it aligns with our strategic plan. This is really gonna help us enhance operational excellence, and it does support our goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as well. The primary goal of these batteries is to increase our energy use flexibility. And through that, we can minimize our electricity demand charges. So at the bottom of the screen, you can see that at certain times of day, we spend 4 times more per unit of energy than other parts of the day. So one strategy these batteries let us do is called energy arbitrage. So we can charge the batteries while energy is cheap and discharge them during those peak times when energy is more expensive. And one thing we learned from that feasibility study is that we think that this particular system has a lifetime cost savings of around $589,000. the batteries can do both energy arbitrage and charge from our solar, so that we're not sending any of our solar back to the grid. We can keep solar generated on county facilities in our county facilities. We also wanted to make sure we were choosing something that was scalable and adaptable. So this isn't really designed for resilience at the moment, but the idea is that we can add additional batteries and really kind of meet some more future goals moving forward. And lastly, we want to model sustainable practices. This is a forward-facing, public-facing building, and so we want to kind of demonstrate some of our commitments. We also want to show other local governments. Jeremiah presented to the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association today about some of our work on batteries. So people are curious, and we get to lead the way. So this graph on the right kind of shows one of these in practice. So this is our first battery that was installed at 40 Cox just a couple weeks ago. So you can see that purplish blue below the line. That's when our batteries are charging in the very early hours of the morning when energy is cheap. And then those pinkish purple parts of the graph is when we're discharging our batteries when energy is more expensive. And this is the project timeline. The main goal, takeaway from this slide, is that we have until December 2026 to complete the project. So we feel like we have, there's maybe about 6 months of work to do. So we feel like there's plenty of time to get it done and do it well. And that's it. Any questions?
Any questions for Jackie?
We have a couple.
I would say that tonight on the agenda, you would actually see an item for us to adopt and accept that grant.
Oh, great.
So.
Just gonna ask, we have a couple more batteries, behind the meter batteries on our capital improvement plan going into the future, or?
I'm looking at Jeremiah and Jackie, but I think that got pushed to the future for this year.
Right, okay. Gotcha.
And we were hoping to do 35 Woodfin in the next round, so it's nice that we were able to get some outside funding to make that happen.
Great.
I'll just say, thank you very much. It's wonderful to actually get this paid for with a grant, and then that we're gonna have more than 500,000 in savings over the lifetime of that. So thank you all for your work on this.
You know, I'll share, I've shared that battery study from 2024 with all kinds of folks around the state, and people are really impressed, and it's a great way to show off our leadership as a county. So that's great.
I just want to, Jackie, thank you. Thanks, Jeremiah. Thanks to the General Services team. This is really excited as we move to a lower carbon economy, while also, saving almost $600,000 over the course of the project. And, this helps us so that it's not a zero-sum game when you pull in these types of resources. So thank you so much for this. It's really the direction we want to be heading as a county. I'm really proud of this. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We're excited to have the opportunity. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Jackie. We appreciate your work. All right, commissioners, any further discussion? All right,
I have a question about the consent agenda.
yes.
Do we need to make any adjustments to fill the county commissioner's seat on the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council?
Oh. That's a great question. We can pull that off and add it to our boards and commissions appointments.
Yeah, I'd make that motion if we need to.
When we convene at 5, I think we have several adjustments to make on our agenda tonight, so you can make that motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, absolutely. All right, commissioners, we are adjourned at 4:45. We will return in 15 minutes. We're adjourned.